Have you ever wondered what the most unique way is to get to China? Well, the East African nation of Tanzania finally has a thriving flag carrier for the first time ever. It's doing so well that they have one of the world's youngest fleets, including two 787s which enable long intercontinental flights. Today we'll see what that experience is like on their longest route. We'll fly in their 787 in business class from their hub in the country's capital of Dar es Salaam to Guangzhou, China. A city that's become increasingly popular to African cities as China has been putting so much money into Africa, while also taking advantage of the cheaper labor. In Tanzania alone, China has built industrial parks, modern cities, train stations, and airports. Air Tanzania is just one of the African carriers that flies to Guangzhou, with Kenya Airways, Egypt Air, and previously Air Peace, and plans from Uganda Airlines and South African Airways as well. We'll look at Air Tanzania's flagship experience, the troubling history of the country's attempt at a flag carrier, and their plans for growth. See the timestamps below to find what you want. Now off to Tanzania. Dar es Salaam inaugurated a brand new international terminal in 2019, just one of China's many investments in the country. This brought the airport up to international standards. I mean, it's got to be one of the best airports in Africa, and you'll see why shortly. The opening of this terminal unfortunately meant their iconic Terminal 2 was going to be phased out, or at least down. If you know African aviation, you'll know how scenic of a terminal this is, with its famous roof and indoor-outdoor setup. It may have been iconic, but it was definitely getting old, so the new terminal really allows the country to grow. And since Terminal 2 still hosts regional flights, it sounds like they're doing some minor renovations to keep it functional, so it's not totally going away. I'll also add that the airport needs a hotel. I had a 12-hour overnight layover, didn't want to waste an hour or more with a hotel in town. All the hotels near the airport are a bit seedy. I booked one, and when I asked my taxi driver if it was a good hotel, he just laughed and said, "You'll see." Not exactly instilling much confidence, so hey, we got a new terminal, now let's accompany it with a true hotel for overnight passengers, or even just something closer to the airport that meets international standards. Back to Terminal 3, however, there's one main entrance to the terminal since there's a screening for all passengers and bags to gain entrance. There was signs pointing around the corner for business class passengers where there was a special entrance to the fast track section, but the door was locked. No worries, because we actually had to check in first anyway. Once inside, there was only a few desks for Air Tanzania. Most flights at this hour are in the old terminal, so these desks were only for the Guangzhou flight. The main reason we had to check in first is to go through the passport and visa check and get a security sticker on our passport. But then I had my boarding pass and lounge access card, and then it was back off to the fast track room, which wasn't exactly advertised, so I had to ask about it. The fast track was excellent, however. It had a comfortable waiting area, but there wasn't any wait for me. There's a desk with outbound immigration and private security behind that. I was through all of it in about 30 seconds, free for premium passengers or for purchase for everyone else. It takes up the elevator and funnels into the CIP Lounge, which is used by all airlines except for Air Tanzania. Because of that, we walked right through the lounge and found the TWIGA Lounge, the lounge specifically for Air Tanzania passengers. In 2021, the TWIGA Lounge was inaugurated to give Air Tanzania a fresh lounge for international passengers, TWIGA being the Swahili translation of giraffe, as in their logo. Also adorned out front with a welded giraffe model. The lounge is a long hallway with a couple sectioned off areas. There's 2 tables best suited for working, but most of the seats are generic for eating, chilling, working, up to you. I also like that they can be arranged for groups of any size, so they can use all seats in busier times of the day. There's also private sections for the restrooms, a gender-neutral prayer area, a kids' play area, a couple sectioned off groups of seats, and rest areas with bed-like chairs for rest, although both were in use, so I didn't want to shove my camera in there. Not every seat has charging outlets, so just look for these side tables. And closest to the food, there's classic dining tables and some couches in front of the TV. The buffet has plenty of stuff to make a solid meal, with lots of spices. Then there's a counter with drinks, including a great coffee machine, and then there's a bar in the corner. If you want something made fresh, they also have menus on most tables. You can order any of these items at any time of day. Not the biggest lounge in the world, but they don't have a ton of flights. I found it to be super comfortable for a couple-hour wait. Then off to the boarding gate, which gave me a chance to admire this new terminal. There's mixed emotions about China's investments around Africa, and while every story has two sides, you gotta love some of the accomplishments in the post-COVID world, like this great terminal. In this trip, I was in the Congo, Nigeria, all around Africa, flying internationally and domestic, and this terminal makes all the rest feel like 100-year-old bus stations. It's got modern finishings, vaulted ceilings, relevant shops and dining. It truly takes out the stress that is commonly there at a lot of African airports in the present day. At our gate, our 787 was sitting idly by. We were unfortunately told we'd have a 2-hour delay, which allowed us to watch the sunrise from the terminal building, which gave great lighting into the terminal, but also great views of the aircraft and airport. That gives us a moment to discuss Air Tanzania's livery. Their logo is the A in a swoop with a cross, kinda making it an AT for their initials, with white on top meant to symbolize a snow-capped Kilimanjaro. That translates to the livery as well, where we see the main logo on the fuselage. And then on the vertical stabilizer, the blue coloring matches one of the nation's main colors, the other being green, which is seen as a stripe on the forward part of the empennage. The top of the stabilizer has the same snow-capped look, once again for Kilimanjaro. And then the giraffe, which replaced the old logo left from the South African ties, giving it much more local identity. Our plane today is a 787-8, one of two in the fleet. This one actually just arrived a couple months ago, making it the world's youngest 787-8. Air Tanzania maintains one of the youngest fleets in the world, and this keeps that number down. Not only that, but it allows more long-haul routes. They've been using the 787s to Guangzhou and Mumbai, but with the second one, they've already added 3-time weekly service from Zanzibar to Dubai, and they also have plans to launch London. No official date yet, but they're already good to fly into Europe. They just need the landing slots. That's enough chatter though. Let's get on board. After the 2-hour delay, I was in the front of the pack as we were led on board and to the left to their business class cabin. In a 222 setup, this is the product seen solely on their wide-body aircraft. And while 222 setups get hate, this is a fairly common configuration in the Dash 8 variant of the 787. So even though this plane is brand new, my assumption is that since their only other widebody sports a 222 setup as well, they wanted to keep it consistent for crew training and especially equipment swaps from one to the other. I was given seat 2J, and since the cabin was only 25% filled, I also got an empty seat next to me. Looking at the seat, the headrest doesn't curl, but it does tilt. The seat itself isn't all that wide, but it was actually super plush, that fresh airplane feel. There's also a little storage cubby over your shoulder that things would roll out of, and then bigger storage on top of the center console. There's reading lights for each seat and a privacy partition that adds essentially no additional privacy. And then on the side of the console is the seat and light controls, but also the charging ports, USB and universal, and headset jack. Below that is a cup holder and seatback TV remote. There's an armrest and what looks like storage below that, but it's really just a black hole to lose whatever you put in there. The tray table pulls out from there as well, and it's a really nice size. Bonus points for swiveling so you can get out with stuff on it. Then in front of you is things like a coat hook and touchscreen TV. There's a shelf below it, and the rubber lip actually keeps things from sliding out on takeoff and turbulence. Kind of an ingenious design. The footwell below that's fairly large, but doesn't offer any additional storage. And then there's a literature pocket with the increasingly rare in-flight magazine. Get them while you still can. There's plenty of windows at each seat with the 787 dimming feature, then an armrest that can be lowered with additional storage slot below that. We then got a hot towel as our first amenity, followed by a bottle of water and headphones that were noise cancelling but super uncomfortable. And then was the bedding. There was the pillow, which was small and underwhelming, but for whatever reason my seat had 4 of them, whereas everyone else only got 1. The blanket's actually super plush, and when unraveled you'll see it's supposed to look like giraffe hide. We were given the choice of apple or orange juice for our welcome drink, and shortly after we were brought amenity kits. The bag itself is actually the same as Uganda Airlines from earlier this year, but obviously with the appropriate logo. I will say that this thing was so full that it was hard to close. Inside was things for grooming, like shaving kit, dental kit, and comb. There was sleep items like eye mask and earplugs. Then there was the amenities with minty mouth spray and lotion. And lastly was the socks, shoehorn, and slippers, which I always appreciate. Honestly, a strong assortment of amenities, even if some were lacking in sustenance. Honestly, it's kind of a miracle to see Air Tanzania with such modern aircraft and long-haul routes just because of what they overcame to get here. When East African Airways closed, new airlines were forced to form in countries like Uganda and Tanzania to fill the void, including Air Tanzania in 1977. Early routes were more regional, with US leased aircraft and a set of Fokkers that were added, then removed, then brought back, then removed again. It wasn't until 1991 when they got their first widebody, a 767 from Ethiopian, but was too big for them and only lasted a year. And that was kind of a trend in the 90s as they gained a reputation for canceling flights, and eventually, with Uganda Airlines, partnered with South African Airways to form Alliance Air in 94, with the goal of reviving air travel in the Southeast Africa region. Alliance Air connected Dar es Salaam with London via Entebbe, but only lasted about 6 years due to major losses. But this just began troubles with aviation in Tanzania. SAA's parent company had pulled investments from Alliance Air a few months earlier, and Air Tanzania claimed that they were using Alliance Air as a Trojan horse to take over air travel for the whole region, screwing over Tanzania and Uganda. Going through privatization in the 2000s, South African Airways eventually took a minority stake in the airline, until the government sold them a majority stake shortly after. They launched a DAR hub to form an African triangle route with the West and South, and planned to modernize the fleet with 737s and 767s. Years later, they still hadn't brought that foretold modernization they promised to Tanzania. They actually never got any of those new aircraft, and they were never able to grow outside of 3 routes from Joburg to Dar, Zanzibar, and Kilimanjaro. The airline was officially in worse shape than when SAA took over, so the Tanzanian government bought back the controlling stake and planned to end the company, but did set aside $10 million to relaunch the airline after they had time to re-strategize. A year later, the government relaunched the airline with a very experienced CEO who brought new revenue systems, fuel services, e-ticketing, accounting systems, new trademark, and most importantly, cleared all debts. The next major hurdle? Reobtaining their ICAO standards tests, while going through this process into the 2010s. From 2011 to 2015, they shut down multiple times due to lack of aircraft. Their only aircraft was often in maintenance, and they lacked the funds needed to get it airworthy again. They tried to lease aircraft, but it never panned out. But at least they didn't just fly these unairworthy aircraft, like a lot of other African carriers were doing in the time. In 2013, they had the fleet to manage domestic flights, as they struggled with fleet and certifications for international flights. Remember, that $10 million they set aside originally? Seems they stopped doing that. In 2016, Tanzania got a new president who made the airline's revival a top priority. He immediately ordered 4 new aircraft in the first year and chose a new president for the airline. They picked up some Dash 8s after settling debts with the Canadian firm, and in 2018, they received their first ever new long-haul aircraft, the 787. A couple months later, they got their A220s to grow the regional network, and could then repurpose older aircraft for cargo, beginning largely after COVID. Since then, they launched their first long-haul route to China in 2022, as China is Africa's biggest investors, essentially making Africa China's China, as one source put it. And it seems to be working. Under the new administration, losses have been slashed year after year, with 2023 only being drawn down by Airbus's required service on the A220s, but still trending towards their best year ever if things continue this year. Hopefully you can see just how impressed I am that they've even made it to this point though, and I'm super excited to see what comes next. They took our orders for breakfast on departure. There weren't any menus, but we were asked if we'd like the poached or scrambled eggs or vegan option. Then asked if we wanted tea or coffee. Less than 10 minutes after the seatbelt sign was off, we got our meals. I chose the poached egg option, which also came with broccoli and what I believe to be mushrooms and a chicken sausage. Don't quote me on that. Then was the bread, but also yogurt with granola that had become soggy, unfortunately. But the fruit was great. Honestly, maybe the best papaya I've ever had. Then was the coffee, which spilled all over with the turbulence climbing out through convective activity, but I did enjoy the coffee that actually made it into my mouth. Plus the Air Tanzania engraved silverware. It was a pretty good meal, honestly. Breakfast is usually lacking on most carriers, but this was definitely above average. Once the meals wrapped up, they wasted no time dimming the windows of the 787. It's a polarizing issue in the aviation community. I get that these windows are revolutionary, but I don't like them. Most of the time I just crack my window to get a look at something and then shut it. These windows require that you wait a couple minutes for them to fully brighten, then another couple for them to dim after you get your clear look, all while disrupting the rest of the cabin. Also, these windows can be locked by the crew. I get why they do it on these super long haul flights, but it's just really frustrating. It makes the window seat almost useless. The entertainment options were initialized in English, Swahili, or Chinese, and could be controlled by the touchscreen TV or the remote, which was handy when reclined. Selection was unfortunately limited, like worse than Uzbekistan Airlines Limited. There was only 10 movies, and a few of them were unfamiliar. They did have TV shows, but once again, limited. There were only 9 shows, and some of them had multiple episodes, but most of them were kids' shows. Honestly, I ended up just using my own downloaded content. You can add things to favorites if those 19 total options were overwhelming for you, and then is the map, which was fully interactive. I was pleasantly surprised to learn that Air Tanzania has in-flight Wi-Fi. They have packages of different quantities of data. Everyone can get 20 megabits for free, or about 15 minutes of browsing, up to 600 megabits, or about 3 to 4 hours for the average person. It just super sucks that they don't offer full flight Wi-Fi like most carriers do these days. Fortunately, just before we were plunged into darkness with the windows, I had a chance to look at the bed on board. The seat does lay fully flat, but you might remember that I said it felt a bit tight. There's a couple things to help with this in bed mode. First off, that armrest near the window goes down, giving you more space to your side. Also, around the headrest of the seat itself is cushioned areas to essentially make a big space for your head. The pillow's small. It works great for lumbar support in flight, and also if you sleep stationary. But if you toss and turn, you'll fall right off it. The blanket was great. It was super soft, super plush. I was worried without overhead air vents, but the cabin was kept cool enough once in flight that I was glad to have that blanket, and it looked great. It's just a bit short, so my feet stuck out the end as an average size human. I found the seat to be wide enough for sleep, but the footwell was different. It looked huge, but it pinches off the deeper you go. If you're short enough, scooch up on the seat and you'll have more space. Otherwise, you're just a bit limited. Privacy-wise, that partition really doesn't do much. You're fairly exposed to the cabin, but as mentioned, there wasn't many people in the cabin, so that itself offered enough privacy for me. Now, if you aren't sleeping like me on this flight, it can get a bit boring. As mentioned, there wasn't much entertainment options, but there's also no real mid-flight snacks, where most carriers have baskets of snacks in the galley. They can bring you beverages, but no food necessarily. In addition, the lavatories are basic. 787s are known for boring labs, but at least there are a few basic amenities like additional lotion, hand sanitizer, and spray. But can someone relay to these carriers that tissues don't work as paper towels? I've noticed that increasingly on more carriers, not just Air Tanzania, but they just break apart as you try to dry your hands. I really wanted to enjoy the sunset as we flew past Kolkata and Dhaka. But with the windows locked, the best I had was going to the galley every so often to see what was going on. It did lead to some great conversations with multiple crew members. They were top-notch. One of them was even working my flight from Lubumbashi the day prior. I did love their a la carte system for the second meal. Basically, whenever you were ready, you could request a dinner service, of which they had one option of chicken and rice, and the other option being beef. It came with beef and veggies, along with some cassava cakes, which is a grain-type product common in East Africa. It came with bread, crackers, and cheese, and 3 seared tuna slices, each with different seasoning and flavor, and then a chocolate cake for dessert. I chased this down with the Safari Lager beer which was suggested by the flight attendant, and gotta be honest, presentation may not have been perfect, but both of these meals were tasty. Especially the second meal. The beef and cassava was great, and the tuna was perfect, and it paired super well with that Safari beer. Great choice by the crew. So what's next for Air Tanzania? They're in an interesting phase. They're trending in the right direction, but obviously wary to overgrow their means too fast with previous issues. Well, Russia's been working with Africa on aviation development agreements, their largest being with Ethiopia, but they recently reached an agreement with Tanzania to strengthen ties and add transport between the countries, while Russia will also help Tanzania strengthen and grow their aviation market. This gives Air Tanzania access to Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Yekaterinburg, if I'm saying that correctly, and Russian carriers get access to DAR, Zanzibar, and Kilimanjaro. Although at the moment, Zanzibar sees Russian flights on a seasonal charter and none of the others. With Air Tanzania lacking the fleet for Russia flights, they will likely benefit more from the added code-sharing abilities under the agreement, and the fifth freedom authorizations for Russian and Tanzanian carriers to transit through the two countries and onto a third. As far as where Tanzania's customer base lies, as Africa's 10th largest metro area, DAR still doesn't see much travel to Europe or the Americas, mostly being from Asian investors in the country or regional travel around Southeast Africa for cultural or local business ties. Still though, Air Tanzania currently boasts one of the youngest fleets in the world with Dash 8s for short haul, 737 MAX and A220 for medium haul, and the two 787s for long haul services. Their website claims that they're soon adding 11 new cities, including places like Joburg, Lagos, Muscat, Kinshasa, and London. Joburg's the only one given an actual start date, with the DRC and Muscat just saying sometime this year, and the rest just saying coming soon. What I will say is that London is the only one that needs the long-haul aircraft, so they may not need more aircraft to make these places a reality. Maybe more medium-haul aircraft, but that's far more realistic. I also always explore possibilities of new airlines reaching the US, and although it's the most lucrative aviation market in the world, I just don't see Air Tanzania trying to get there. It's just too far and there isn't enough business or culture shared by the two countries. With such a young fleet, I just hope they can keep growing their medium-haul markets and begin their growth that way, just like Ethiopian and Kenya Airways did before them. And now look at those two carriers. Good luck to Air Tanzania. I'm so dang proud of Air Tanzania. In most of the world, aviation is a necessity. People take it for fun, for work, for whatever, and competition is super high. In Africa, most routes are rarely served besides the major routes. This has made Africa the world's most volatile aviation market. Most carriers, even the biggest, have less than 5% market share, as there's like a million small carriers that share the loads. Ethiopian, Egypt Air, Kenya Airways, and Royal Air Morocco are some of the largest, but mostly because of how long they've existed and because they've been able to join the three major alliances, allowing for connecting passengers and code share abilities with some of the world's largest carriers. East and South Africa also suffer because they have mostly intra-Africa travelers, as opposed to the European and American markets of North, West, and Central Africa. This makes it extra tough for an airline to grow. Obviously, Air Tanzania was not exempt from this in the past with no shortage of struggles, but now they have brand new 737 MAXs, brand new A220s, brand new 787s, on top of the famously efficient Dash 8s. This gives them the most modern and efficient fleet in the region, capable of short, medium, and long-haul flights. I was worried they'd outgrow their means. It's easy to get trigger happy and start adding planes and destinations before you're ready. Air Tanzania has been cautious since their rebrand though, and it seems to be paying off. As they solidify their fleet, they'll finally be able to start looking into some of the cities they've always dreamed of. As far as the product, the airport is top tier, definitely the best in Africa. Brand new terminal, excellent outbound procedures for premium passengers. The lounge has great amenities, may not be the flashiest, but they've got everything you need in a lounge except for showers maybe. On board, the 222 setup sucks, but it kinda works for them. I get why they did it. They've got the makings for a great carrier. I do wish they had a bigger pillow, better headphones, and a menu from an amenity standpoint. The entertainment also needs some work if they're going to grow their long-haul services, more options, and full-flight Wi-Fi. But other than that, I don't have much. The crew is absolutely incredible, the food was great, the bed was comfortable, and I got off the plane wanting to do it all over again. The last bit is the cost. African flights are typically more expensive, typically because of taxes and fuel, and this was no exception. This was the 6th cheapest option on this route, despite being the only nonstop. Being only a quarter full in business class ain't a great sign either for revenue. Even economy looked thin, although less important. I'd guess that if they can secure other routes like London, which will have higher load factors, they'll drop the Guangzhou flights, kinda like Air Peace did. There's just too much competition between Africa and China, most of which are Chinese citizens who are more likely to fly the more common carriers. And relatively speaking, there's not many Tanzanians going to China, so that's a main market missing. Places like London, however, would see far more Tanzanians traveling and hopefully help to fill the cabins. Barring them joining an alliance, however, they'll largely need their own citizens to fly with them, so choosing the right route is paramount. Unfortunately, our late arrival meant that I missed the China Southern flight from here to San Francisco that I was going to film, but I came out with a great plan B. So while y'all wait to see what that was, let me know what your thoughts are on this super unique route, and until next Sunday, safe travels, I'll see y'all next time.